Welcome to the klutchkittengaming podcast, where I play an indie game for 5 hours and let you know whether or not it's worth your time and money. Hello and welcome everyone. This is James, also known as Clutch Kitten, and I am so excited because today I'm not alone. I'm joined by Indiana Black, who is also known as Froskurinn. Frosk, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm actually great. We were briefly speaking kind of before the podcast started. And I think that was probably one of the best conversations that I've had pre-warm up in podcasts. Usually you just kind of come in dry and you're just like, you ready to go? Yeah, I'm ready to go. And then you just go.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm super glad you're here. For my listeners who might not know who you are, which chances are if they know of me, they probably know who you are, but just a quick little bit of background. Earlier on in this year, you started casting League of Legends for LEC, the European League, and immediately when you came on the scene, you were one of those people who you just couldn't not notice. You were not only the only female caster, but you brought flair to your style. I remember a pink suit that you wore. You have some really bold tattoos. And then you brought a really strong form of casting to the desk. And the thing is, I originally wasn't going to contact you because I was so nervous. But then I found out one day when you were talking with Daniel Dracos on Euphoria that you're originally from the Portland area. And I'm like, oh my word, I need to contact her now. It's like she's from my neck of the woods. This is like the nail in the coffin. So thank you so much for being interested in joining for an episode.
No, that's very, very kind. What part of Portland are you from?
So I lived in Vancouver growing up most of my
Nice.
life. I was born in Portland, and now I'm down a little bit south of Portland in Salem, but just constantly going through there. And I kind of, whenever people ask where I'm from in the Pacific Northwest, I always just say Portland because
It's easier.
I've always lived kind of on the outskirts of Portland. Yeah, exactly.
No, my father used to live in like Westland, so I used to drive through or drive near Salem like basically every time.
Nice. I like it. Salem is probably a lot more, there's a little bit more going on than probably you might remember. I feel like even just like 5 or 6 years ago, Salem was the most boring place ever, but it's getting there. Anyways, I spoiled a little bit about who you are, but I haven't even grazed the surface of what your life has been like or who you are as a person. And so because of that, I wanted to start out with just the most open-ended question possible. Frosk, who are you today?
Yeah, definitely a loaded question. I mean, I think you kind of hit the umbrella in which I fall under is it feels like when you have a job in esports and a job in kind of the gaming industry or content creation in general, it's almost like your job really defines you. You know, you meet new people or you go to parties and I'm really fortunate that my partner doesn't work in the industry. And so I really get to overlap with a lot of people who just have vastly different experiences than I do when we go out and kind of like meet different circles of friends. And there's always kind of this I don't really like talking about my job. I think that it can get really tedious and boring, and then you kind of answer the same questions over and over. Like anytime you get into an Uber and the Uber small talk is always like, so what do you do? And I just always make up a different profession. I'll be like a librarian, I'll work in like IT and tech, because I always fucking hate saying like, oh yeah, I work as an esports commentator, because it always ends up like, oh yeah, my son plays video games and I can go pro now. And oh, have you ever heard of that Fortnite? And you're like, yeah, oh no, it's fine. It actually kind of works like it.
Oh.
So it's really unfortunate because I do feel that people who have made their living kind of like through the internet and kind of through these different mechanisms and platforms are defined by their job, even though it's such a small part of the greater whole. So I'd like to think that I'm not defined by my career, but probably for 99% of people's interactions with me, especially on like the scale that League of Legends and kind of the scale of the platform that League of Legends gives me, that unfortunately is it. And it's just such a small fraction. So who am I? I'd like to think that I'm kind of like a goofy, really blunt individual. And I think that catches a lot of people off guard and is one of the secret formulas about why I've been maybe successful in my my professional career, because you are right, I do bring a vastly different style of analysis or communication to like the broadcast that I join, and I am quite known for being very outspoken, very brash, very blunt, and kind of in your face. And that is technically a part of my personality, but it's not my defining suit.
Totally. So when you're hanging out with your partner's, sphere of influence or her friends, do you also make up a career around them, or is it like you're trying to explain the whole esports thing to them? What's that like?
It's usually my partner that kind of blurts out what I do. She's like, "Oh, she works in video games. She works on television." I was like, "Nah, I don't really work on television, but I do work in games." It was funny. We went to a we recently, because we both met in Shanghai when I was over there, and we recently, when we moved to Berlin, went out to dinner with one of her friends from Shanghai, who basically like came to Berlin visiting and had a bunch of different friends from Berlin, and was like, instead of going to see each of you individually, I'll just like throw a party at like a restaurant, and I'll invite all of you, and it'll just be kind of like a mixer. Everyone will get to know each other, and we kind of made a friend through that way, and it was great. Hit it off. She's like quite lovely, very intelligent, love hanging out with her. Works as like I wouldn't even know how to explain like what she does. She's really good at like marketing and knitting and all these things. But her partner is worked in esports as well as like a UI developer for some of the teams, especially some of the LEC teams. I think he's done some like work with Fnatic and things like that. But it's just kind of that really weird maneuver where you like go to someone's Thanksgiving and you're brand new to friends, so you're getting dressed up. You're like, I really want to make a new friend right now. I can't fuck this up. So I got to be nice. I got to be like, you're an adult and it's really hard to make friends. You don't normally meet new people. And you kind of feel like you're going on a first date, and it's so strange. And then you like get there and her partner knows who I am and it's
Oh my gosh.
kind of weird about it. And so it was just kind of this ridiculous song and dance for Thanksgiving, which is already stressful itself. And it was like a friend date. So
Oh my
I don't know,
gosh.
just very strange situations, and those occur sometimes for me because of my privilege and access to working in an industry like esports that gives me a lot of amplification there.
Totally. My palms are getting sweaty just thinking about that situation. It's like, oh my gosh, what would I say? Wow.
I fuck it up all the time where I have no idea what to say because it's just kind of like the intro to the show. You said something that was like really kind and like very nice, and I'm like, oh, that's really sweet of you to say, but I never know how to respond. We went and saw a play the other day, and it's like we get up and we're talking about the play and we're about to leave. There's this guy and he's just staring at me, and he asks if I went to like a university. I didn't catch the name of it. I'm like, no, I didn't go to the university. He's like, your face, it looks really familiar. And I'm sitting there like, I have no idea what to say. So I'm just like, well, I work in broadcasting, so chances are that you've probably seen me. It happens all the time. And then of course my partner catches wind of it, and she just like likes to just jam her foot into everything. She's like, oh yeah, she's famous. You probably know her from TV. Do you play League of Legends? And the guy's like, oh, that's where it is. And then it turned really awkward. And I'm just kind of like, do I ask him more? Do we go out for drinks now? Do I thank him for his time? Like, I have no idea. And then I probably just come up like a complete dick when people like come up to me and they're like happy to meet me, especially because I worked in the LPL for so long, and you're through a language barrier, and the English broadcast didn't really have that much front-facing access to the fans. Like there were lovely Chinese fans that were incredibly kind and like very excited to interact with me, but on the whole, that wasn't the experience that I had for majority of my esports career. And then moving over into the LEC, you get much more access to that. You're like front and center. You're casting in front of the audience, and it is a very big transition into what is my relationship with these people? What the fuck do I say? Because I'm like, I don't know. I don't think those things. People are like, thank you so much for being a role model. I'm like, I'm a terrible fucking role model.
Don't look to me, please don't. I like it. Oh my word. So you mentioned living over in Shanghai as well as you've lived in Europe. What's it been like? Like, what have been some of your favorite places to travel, or what do you like the most about being in so many different places, and what's kind of the most difficult thing for you?
I think my favorite place that I've ever lived, actually, I would say Berlin is now probably my favorite place that I've ever lived. But previously it was Australia. And I think it was also just kind of like the timeline, not just because. So before I went to the LPL broadcast, before I got moved in-house to Shanghai, it was external in Sydney, Oceanic offices. So the OPL ran the OPL and the LPL English broadcast for about 2.5, 3 years before it moved over in-house into China. And that was why I ended up in China, because I was originally in Australia. And I think the standard and quality of living and kind of the friends that I made and the professional relationships, but majority of the age that I was so young. You're just like, my partner has this idea that anything you do before the age of 25 just really shouldn't count, because you don't really start living life or kind of figuring out how to be an adult until you're about 25. And
Hmm.
I'm in alignment there. And I was very young. Um, I was figuring out who I was going to be and what I cared about, and figuring myself out personally and professionally. And so I think my career with Riot Games and like my colleagues and my peers really helped shape me. So Australia will always have like, I don't consider myself American. I consider myself Australian, because I really figured out who I was in that type of culture, which is very vastly different than the American culture.
That totally makes sense. That's super interesting to hear about. So I'm actually curious. You mentioned kind of starting to really come to your own when, when people turn 25, but I'm actually curious, what brought you to where you are today in terms of gaming? Like, what originally got you into gaming? Was it as a kid or later into college, or what was it like for you?
It was really my mom. My parents never got married technically, but it's just easier to say they were divorced. So separate households, and my mother was a single parent raising two children, and she was really into computer science from like quite early on. I just remember kind of looking around at all of my friends in the early '90s, and I was one of the first to have access to my own PC, like my own desktop computer. I
Hmm.
remember, being incredibly young and sitting on my mother's lap and watching her kind of figure out the computer. I think um, she is technically an accountant, but took a computer science like night classes and things like that.
Hmm.
Because she just recognized that that was where the future was going to be, and recognized the importance of that technology. So she's actually quite savvy in some of the early computer languages and understands programming. We had programming books all over the house.
Uh-huh.
And in line with that came the recognition of video games. Like my mother couldn't afford a babysitter all the time because childcare is ridiculously expensive in America. But, she could find a secondhand Sega, and me and my brother would play it together, and she would play with us. And I remember I remember when Pokemon just came out, and
Hmm.
we got a Game Boy to share. And going to bed, like my mom put, you can't take it under the blanket and have like your flashlight like everyone did to stay up and play Pokemon. And I remember kind of coming into my mother's room late one night, and she was playing it, and she was trying to figure it out. So it was the fact that my mom recognized how influential the technology change was going to be with computers quite early on, educated herself in it, not just on kind of like a personal side, but also on a professional side. And then in extension, not got into gaming, because I would never describe my mother as like a gamer, but was definitely very conscious about like what her kids were being exposed to in terms of media, and not just reading the news and like, oh, GTA allows you to run over hookers and prostitutes and it's an awful game and it's going to make your child into a serial killer, but like actually playing the games and, okay, this is how this works, and this is what my children are being exposed to, and this is what I think about this type of media. And she was kind of the barrier to entry of, you guys can play this game, you can't play this game until you're this age. This is what this game has. And so it's funny because my mom's like kind of a crazy cat lady, but she's like really sharp and very eloquent and up to date on the gaming scene.
That's really cool. I think definitely people who are in our generation or a little bit before, our parents are definitely the ones who were dealing with that, where it's this moving into internet, moving into all these new games and systems and all that sort of stuff. And I can imagine how difficult it would be as a parent. And so that's cool to hear that your mom actually embraced it and tried to learn more about it instead of, yeah, a lot of the people who just kind of looked at the headlines that were saying, yeah, running over prostitutes and all that sort of stuff. I think that's cool. She kind of took it by the horns and actually embraced it. Are there any games that kind of stand out to you from your childhood besides maybe Pokemon?
I think the very first game that I ever played was Sonic. And so I was really big. Like I had access to majority of the consoles. I don't think it was until like the 360 and things like that that I really picked a side between, Sony or Xbox or Nintendo or things like that. So like the big console for me was the Dreamcast actually, and the Sonic Adventure battle games. I really loved those style of games, and I really got into racing games. Kind of, I know it's weird because Sonic's more like a platformer, but I think that was kind of
Yeah.
like my start and my love of just this idea of like, look at how fast I can go, and getting into games that kind of gave me that adrenaline rush for speed and things like that. But kind of the games that defined my childhood were Pokemon, Sonic, The Legend of Zelda, Final Fantasy, and it wasn't until you know later on that Halo really came out. And I wasn't like a huge
Mhm.
Halo player, but all my friends were. And so that was kind of the game that I would play with my friends. So, I didn't sit and do like the campaign mode and really get into shooters. Like I was never really a modern warfare or like a COD type of individual. But, when it came to going over to my friend's house and we're having a sleepover, of course, the game of choice was always going to be Halo. And it's just about like, okay, you set the tank there. I'm going to get the Banshee. We're going to ramp this shit off the Scorpion. We're going to see how far we can go.
Hell yes, yeah. I love those overnight Halo parties. Like, I just remember, like, my favorite thing was for me and my friends, it was Halo 2, and we played a lot of sword battles on this tiny map, and it was
Ah,
just
yeah.
like constant
Ah,
bloodbath. It
yeah.
was the most
The one
amazing
with
thing.
the teleport?
I think so. Well, no, I'm thinking
The,
it's like a
yeah, the portal doors.
portal door. It was the purple ship. I just remember it being tiny, so the sword battling was just constantly happening. It was amazing. It might have had the portal doors. I can't remember.
I'm pretty sure, like, some of those maps, like, just define childhoods.
Absolutely. Do you think that playing Halo with your friends then was kind of what pushed you into being interested in esports and competition in games, or was it something else that kind of pushed you that direction?
I think inherently, well, I don't know. I assume people are competitive. I assume that inherently people are competitive, and it was just kind of the next platform or avenue to take that level of competition. I know that I, played traditional sports growing up. I had siblings, so maybe that also just made me naturally very competitive. Uh, but it's kind of interesting. I never even really tried to consider it that way. I do think that in kind of that same vein that we're talking about, it's such an iconic moment in people's,
Hmm.
especially people like our age of like their childhood when they kind of think back to the good old days. It's usually playing on Halo or having your friends over and trying to create like a LAN party and things like that. The fact that those games were multiplayer games, the fact that it was kind of like the big rise of, I mean, shooters really did take off. You had things like GoldenEye before then,
Hmm.
Doom and Quake, but in terms of like the console shooter and like the mainstream access to FPS games with COD and Modern Warfare and Halo, it really was our generation and timeline. So maybe there's something there that we were the start of games not necessarily needing a single player storyline to really be successful, but that was like the big, the technological advancements and how we were connecting like Xbox Live, and how it just revamped gaming for such a massive audience if you didn't have access. Because I mean, it was much harder for parents to give gateway access to their kids to buy a PC, buy a gaming PC that could run these things, make sure that you had the internet speed, make sure that you could get connected. And of course, there was a huge population like the PC gamer master race that when the console wars used to actually be a thing that we talked about all the time that could do that. But for majority of people in my neighborhood, it was you had a console, and the big wave of actually being able to play with your friends when they weren't, staying over at your house was going online on Xbox Live and playing Halo together. So I think it's just kind of like right place, right time that created this affinity towards esports and how we expect to interact with games, versus we were competitive people and that's what created our drive for esports, and it came out of this natural human instinct. I just think it was a byproduct of our time.
That totally makes sense. What was it that originally drew you into League? Was it just seeing it one day and starting to play, or did your friends introduce you to it? What was it like for you?
My best friend in uni, a guy named Zane Rodriguez, shout out. He now works I think he worked a little bit on Titanfall, like briefly as a programmer.
Oh.
He got into League of Legends, and I was never really a big PC person. I had a Mac basically my entire like I had a PC, like a home PC through elementary and middle school. And then I got a Mac when I got into high school because I got super into graphic design. And my mother was like, this is the machine that you do all your graphic design on. And for some reason bought me a Mac that I had into uni. So I didn't ever really play computer games. And I remember the first time I played League of Legends, I was like, what the fuck is this? Why can't I move with the arrow keys? Why do I have to click around? This is bullshit. This UI is so terrible. So like I was locked out of esports for a long time then because esports was so really reliant on, especially the mainstream esports like CSGO and StarCraft at the time, was really reliant on the internet connection to be able to execute. And so
Yeah.
I had no idea. I understood like distantly that people really liked WoW, that people loved playing Warcraft, that StarCraft was like a big thing, and like League of Legends was coming up. I think Dawngate was also still actually alive then. Maybe Heroes of the Swarm had
Mhm.
just started, and we decided on League of Legends. And I remember I started playing right after Nidalee came out, and that was like the selling feature because I was just very off about it. And Zane was like, "No, you have to play. There's a champion. She turns into a cat." And I was like, "Cat? I mean, I do like cat girls. Okay, I'm in."
Hell yeah. There you go. I like it. I like it. I think I started playing back when Vi came out, and I was like, "Oh man, it's this lady with these gigantic fists. She's like Hulk and like punching through things." I was on board. That I mean, a very similar story for me kind of starting out in college, and I remember vaguely playing the first time, and I was like, I have no idea what this game is. My friend was probably trying to instruct me on how to play, and it's like, why? Yeah, just like you, why do I have to click around so much? Why can't I just click once and move and just do everything? It's a very complicated game, but that's interesting hearing that's kind of your roots in it. Before we get more into kind of how you got involved into esports, what does your gaming look like today? I know you're incredibly busy kind of creating a lot of your own content and doing that sort of stuff, but do you still find yourself with time to game today? And if so, what does that look like?
um So the reality is that I don't really get to play a game. For the longest time, I didn't even play League of Legends. It was kind of
Mhm.
like I have time to, research on the patch, crunch the numbers, watch pros play on their stream, go back and watch and analyze the pro player VODs, or kind of talk to different coaches or talk to different players and ask them questions. Or I have time to actually load up a game of League of Legends and play it. And I think there was a period of time where I didn't play League for maybe close to a year, like not even a game at all. And I
Mhm.
actually felt really disconnected. And so this year specifically, I tried to play a lot more, and it just helps with like familiarity of things and kind of like different ways to think about how to express concepts in the game. And so I really do value playing it. But I'm also coming up onto a point in my life where when I'm going to be like 28 this year, and it's just crazy to think that I'm 10 years, 11 years older than some of these players that I'm casting. And I don't necessarily think that I'm old by any means, or that there's like an age limit on gaming, but I'm trying to plan. You were in China. You are already 20. Sorry, my girlfriend is writing to me on. I am 28. Yeah. Oh, I'm going to be 29 this year. Oh shit, I'm even older than I thought.
Oh man, you're
I'm going to
ancient.
be 29 this year. Oh god, it's getting worse. And so I have to think about things like buying a house and getting married and having kids, because these are all things that I value. And not everyone has to value those things. That's totally fine. Like, you do you.
Mhm.
Whereas I don't necessarily have the same free time. There's always that famous or funny meme where it's like the guy who's holding the diapers and he's like looking sadly at like the video game case. It's like adult life came way too soon. I mean, that's just kind of the reality of it. I have a really loving partner who I really enjoy spending time with, and it's about time management. I could load up a game of League of Legends when I should be using that time management to like really hardcore study the game, or
Yeah.
I can, hang out and have hobbies outside of League. So for a long time, I didn't play any games. If I did, it was just playing League of Legends. It didn't mean that I didn't study the game. I studied the game way too much. Now I'm trying to like figure out a healthier work-life balance there.
Yeah.
But now I've started to play Red Dead Redemption, and it's like my stress release. My partner calls it, do you need to play the cowboy game? do you need to go relax and play the Cowboys? I'm like, yes,
The
I
cowboy
want to go
game.
fishing. The cowboy game. I love role-playing games. I'm a big JRPG fan, so like the Final Fantasy games, I can't. Bravely Default 3, although Square Enix is going to call it Bravely Default 2. I'm like, bitches, you guys already had a sequel. Like, what are you doing? Great tweet was like, Bravely Default 3, Bravely Default 2. I was like, that's actually how Square just names things. So I'm super excited because it'll come out for the Switch, which is basically just the adult Game Boy. And I'm like, yes, adult Game Boy. And I get to play
Hell
a
yes.
JRPG. So when I'm like traveling around to different events, hopefully I'll actually be able to play video games again. I miss it. Oh, God.
I love it. So lots of Red Dead Redemption 2 to chill out and JRPGs. I'm on board with the JRPG train. Are there any, besides Final Fantasy, are there any other JRPGs that stand out to you, or is it like that has been your series?
Persona. I played a lot of Persona in university,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that just dungeon crawler, dating sim, JRPG. I was like, what does this game not have? This is amazing.
This is perfect. This is everything I could want. I love it. So, kind of shifting our focus back towards League again, what originally took you from being in your college dorm or apartment or whatever it was and kind of not knowing what the hell you were playing? How did you get from there to casting on a stage where thousands and thousands and thousands of people are watching?
I mean, people will call it passion, but passion is really just the politically correct term of calling obsession, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what it is. It was just an obsession, an addiction. And I was definitely addicted to video games and specifically League of Legends to an unhealthy extent for like the first probably year and a half that I was playing it. At my highest, because I wanted to try to go pro. I was like, oh, I want to try to be a pro player. So I put in like hours, like 14 to 16 hours, sometimes like
Damn.
multiple days in a row for, weeks at a time. That destroys you. That is so like unhealthy. And it just created a really toxic mindset. I remember the highest I got, and I was never even going to be close. Like, I think the highest I got was like Diamond 1, barely like scraping in. Like, there was just no way that I was going to be good enough. And so I transferred into streaming like really early on. This was back in the days of like Own TV and Justin TV before Twitch was really even a thing. And I'd give commentary is what I called it, because coaching didn't really exist as like now I would say, oh, I'll coach you on stream, similar to what LS does. But at the time, didn't have the vocabulary for it. It was like so young and early on that I just watched people of all different ELOs and all different matchups. And it's funny now because I would never be recognized as a caster for my expertise in champion matchups because I just don't play the game to a high enough level personally and then have that same knowledge. But at the time, that was like my bread and butter because that was all I really did is I just played at a decently high level comparatively to the rest of the audience. And so I could walk people through matchups and I would clip the viewer would write, and this is my game, and I'd go and spectate them and kind of watch them play through it and then give them feedback on how they were playing the lane when they were backing. And then I'd clip it and I think it was Own TV. It might have been Justin TV. Created like a massive library of all these different ELOs and champions. It could be like, Platinum or whatever, and Nasus versus Singed, and there'd be like a 45-minute clip of me walking this player through. Okay, this is how you're going to itemize here, and this is when you should take your back, and things like that. And I was doing this, and a guy from ESL, a guy named Tasty Nubbins, saw me and asked if I wanted to be I know, right? Shout out to Tasty. Asked if I wanted to be a commentator. I had a brief call with, I think, a woman, something to do with a dragon. Our names are ridiculous. SNL really did get it right with like Sex Panda.
Oh my.
Tasty Nubbins and something to do with like a silver dragon. And I think it was like 10 minutes later, and they're like, okay, yeah, you should try out to be a commentator. And this was before the Challenger circuit existed for North America. It was all basically like Go for Lols. And they had you would cast with ESL, you could do the Go for Lols, and then kind of like their big tournament was the ESP, I think it was, like Pro League, and it was all the challenger players, like guys like Froskurinn would be in this league. And I would cast the European Go for Lols because it was in the morning due to my time zone, and then I would go to work, and then I would come back and I would cast the EPS league where some challenger players like created teams and then would go into it, and you had guys like Malfoy X, I think was his name, was kind of like the big caster at the time. Zyrene used to cast with them. He came from the exact same background. But right
Really?
before I joined them, Zyrene had actually gotten signed by Riot. And I ended up casting with a guy named Pyrotechnics, who went on obviously
Mhm.
to cast the EULCS. And we were casting these challenger players in the evenings, and Zyrene was watching because Riot was preparing to take the North American or create the North American Challenger broadcast, and these would be a lot of the players that they would be working with. So Zyrene was gathering information and checking in on the scene, and he happened to be watching when Pyra and I were casting together. Pyra and I didn't know each other, had never casted together before, and Zyrene pulled us aside afterwards and was like, "You guys have potential. You should continue to cast together because you are the diamonds in the rough in this environment." So we're like, okay.
Yeah.
So Pyra and I just looked at each other like, do you want to be a caster? I want to be a caster. Let's cast together.
What was it like trying to learning to cast so early on, because there's not a lot for you to turn to. Obviously, I think there's probably StarCraft going on that you could look to some of those casters, but like how did you learn to cast? What was that like?
We watched Monty and Doa like almost exclusively. We'd call them peer reviews, and LCK was kind of like the big broadcast at the time, and Monty and Doa were in our sphere like the premier casters for League of Legends. And so Pyra and I would always watch the LCK, and we'd watch it together and literally talk about, okay, not just like what are they saying at this time, but how mechanically is it working, and trying to figure out like the vocabulary to stitch it together. And now like kind of working in the Riot program, and working with guys like Julian Pastry Time Carr, who also was very passionate about the kind of like Riot and League of Legends idea of casting and giving vocabulary to make sure that when we're speaking to each other and giving feedback that we're talking about the same thing, things like pickups and handoffs, and taking some terminology also from traditional sports casting. But it was literally looking at our peers and just being like, in this team fight, Doa is popping off when? What type of volume is he using? How is he oscillating himself? Where is like the dynamics in his vocal range? How is Monte Cristo like picking off from him? When do they choose to go into humor? What are kind of like the subjects? What makes it funny? And then trying to do that on the EPS broadcast. And then we're like, we need more practice. So I was hosting a show called China Talk at the time, because I was living with Kelsey Moser, who it's so funny. She had the opportunity. She like worked in finance and like hedge funds. Like she worked for the International Monetary Fund when I first met her. Like this massive
Jeez.
economics background, like very intelligent, super driven, and she really loved esports. And she wanted to get a job as a journalist. And she contacted LOL Esports for Riot Games and was like, "Can I do coverage for you?" And they're like, "We need coverage on either the LMS or the LPL. You
Mhm.
choose." And she decided to go for the LPL, but very easily could have gone for the LMS. And she wanted to do like all of this content alongside just writing. And so, she tried to get, I think, Rapid Casting as the host for China Talk, but he kept canceling and he was super unreliable. So I was like, I will do it. It's
Pick me,
fine.
please.
I will be the I will be the host for this show. I'd already done like the graphics, so we just started up and we were just doing this project. And she's like, "No one is doing an English broadcast of this, and you're the caster that I know. Will you do
Mhm.
an English broadcast for this?" I'm like, "Okay." So Pyrotechnics, myself, and Kelsey started the English broadcast of the LPL like as a grassroots project. And literally the first time we streamed, we had like 8 viewers. And by the time that we did the 2014, I think it was the spring or maybe the summer finals, it was OMG versus EDG. We had 44,000 viewers. And so in terms of like working with Twitch, we were basically doing everything. We did the graphics, the production for it. Kelsey was running like OBS for that final. She was our observer. We flew to San Francisco to do it from Twitch's studio so we could actually cast in person. I wore a fucking terrible outfit. Pyrotechnics also wore a terrible outfit. And we were probably pretty terrible. Like, I haven't gone back and listened to it, but I'm sure it's not great. And we just casted, but it was like, we were literally doing it for reps because it was about just getting better. So in the mornings we would do go for LOL in Europe. I'd go to work, I'd come back, I would cast EPS, and then I think at like 8 p.m., 9 p.m. at night, the LPL broadcast would start due to the time zone. And Pyrotechnics and I would stay up to like 6 a.m. casting LPL, and sometimes it would feed directly into the Go floors, and then I'd cast that and I'd do it all over again. I literally just sat like that for, you know, a year, a little bit over a year of just like grinding it out and just getting so many different reps and really trying to make content kind of saturate the community with like, these are the LPL players, this is why you should care, and this is the challenger players, and this is why you should care, just trying to do everything.
First of all, that is insane. That sounds like quite a ride, just like grinding out so many of these casts. But that seems like such a great way to learn. But going back really quickly, what made your guys' outfits so bad in that cast? I'm so curious.
Oh my god, it's so bad. Um, esports, okay. Esports has a lot to like really reevaluate when it comes to fashion. We are still just like not there. And don't like people really go, they're like, Frosk's fashion is great. Like she's like the fashion guru. And I'm like, my fashion's been terrible for a really long time. Even this year, there were like a lot of like big misses. I think I'm just finally kind of getting to like an okay ground. But this was, esports for the longest time just dressed everyone like a fucking waiter, or it was like you're in middle school and you are having a band assembly. So all the guys are wearing these button-up shirts that have no pattern. They're just like a flat color. They roll them up to the elbow and like these big giant rolls. They have a vest on because everyone's just like tiny in esports and very young. You gotta just like really put your foot on the back and just like pull on that strap to get it as tight as possible to fit them. And then they have like sometimes a tie, and it's just very strange looking. And we still sometimes do that. I'm like, stop it, guys. We have to stop dressing like waiters. It is not worth it. And that's what I was wearing. I was wearing a really ill-fitting shirt with a tie and a vest. And I had really long hair that was just kind of like washed out brown. It was like in my face. You put the headset on, you couldn't like tell where my eyes were. And Pyrotechnics and I think we're wearing like gray, purple, and white. I'm like, what is this? This is terrible.
Wow, that's incredible. I will say that I think LEC specifically, the European League, this year specifically, I've really noticed like the style game definitely taking its step up. It wasn't something I noticed before all the different casters started wearing these different outfits. But once it started happening, I'm like, oh man, they're like, this feels like more of a groovy cast. They're more like in tune with what's going on. It's just not like stale suit and tie, kind of like what you're saying. But that's so interesting hearing kind of what it was like from the caster's perspective and being in that realm.
It was really intentional. The LEC brought in stylists. My partner was super influential in like helping guide fashion because she has a design background, and there was purpose in everything. Like no one will wear the same outfits that Vedius wears. He has kind of like this almost like 60s Brit pop punk type of thing. Like he'll wear super slim fitting suits, and then he'll wear like quite billowy patterned shirts. Like kind of his famous signature suit on the LEC would be like that kind of pink taupe sausage colored suit, and then he wears like a black graphic button up with it that's kind of a thin, almost an All Saints style shirt or material, and then like mod boots and kind of push his hair back. And then like Medic will wear, bright, big floral patterns. He has like his suspenders. Dracos is going to be the only guy on our broadcast that will wear a burnt orange. He has like much more flamboyant, like brilliant textures and colors, just like an emerald green suit. Like no one else will wear an emerald green suit. Trevor is quite traditional. I think he's probably the closest to the suit and tie, but he always makes sure that he's got the really nice watch on, and when he has his shirt, it's like it's crisp. It's like the big Hugo Boss collar with like a big tie. Like he'll never wear like a skinny tie or anything like that. So it's making sure that you have a style identity for everyone, and then making sure that they're all cohesive and working together. Because like we're fucking esports. I'm not up here tonight at 11. You'll be afraid of what's in your pee, or like bullshit like that. Like I'm not a news anchor. I'm on a sports broadcast that's closer to WWE than it is to football.
That's so cool hearing about how the transition has gone to like being so intentional about that. So you were on kind of the front lines of grinding out these reps of casting. I know you coached for a stint, at least a year or two or something like that. What was it like learning to coach in esports? Because like you were saying, coaching in esports wasn't really a thing until like, a few years back. What was it like doing that?
I mean, I would hope that it would be completely different now, because I just think it was, the infrastructure back then was so atrocious and just really mishandled. I never thought that I was a particularly good coach. I got decent feedback from some of the orgs and the teams that I worked with, but I have mad respect for a lot of these people who are in coaching positions, because it can just be so difficult. And I think I would do it completely different now that I have more experience in the industry. And it's just kind of this idea of when I was doing it, you go to boot camp, you get a gaming house. Everyone's basically living in like a giant house that the organization can afford and like not bleed money. You like set up all of your equipment, all of the PCs and everything in like a living room or a dining room at the time, and then you are on Skype and you're setting up scrim blocks with any of the teams within your region that you can get access into. You wake up late, have breakfast. If you're the coach, you're usually the person who's like responsible to making sure that like your players are up and alive and have toothpaste and have eaten their breakfast and are sitting down. And then you run the scrim block. You usually, before the scrim block, you'd have like your whiteboard or something. You talk about like the different plans that you're going to be working on that day. If that was a composition, if that was a communication, if that was, whatever it happened to be that you broke down, run into the scrim so you'd have a goal, and then you'd have like kind of like feedback afterwards. If tensions get really flared or really high, then you're literally there as like a human guidance counselor or therapist, or just like conflict management or resolution machine, which definitely like no one's qualified to be, especially to that extent and for how young it is. Like there's a reason why now teams have like sports psychologists and dietitians and managers and head coach and strategic coach and analysts. Like it's so much more, at least I hope, much more full-fledged. And it was just super disaster. Just think about if you have in high school or in uni and you're setting up like a club esports team. It's probably very similar to that, where you've got like one loud voice is like, guys, I think we should do this, and get that out of your mouth. What are you doing? That guy's drunk again. I gotta go pick him up, and like that type of bullshit. So my experience as a coach, like as soon as I got the call from Riot to be like, do you want to be a caster? I was like, fuck yes, get me out of this. Cause it was so unstable. It was so just toxic and mentally draining. That I zipped out of that. I was like, LS, you want to coach this team? He's like, yeah, I want to coach a team. I'm like, great, management, this guy will coach the team. See you guys, good luck. And I was gone.
I'm out.
I'm out. Peace.
After you got that call from Riot, obviously I'm like condensing all these years of casting you've had, but what were some of the biggest takeaways from casting, and again, like growing up in this industry and really following it through from being kind of this grassroots type thing to turning into a real production? Like, what was it like being in the midst of that?
Oh, so much. Just growing as a professional, learning. I won't name names, but there have been people that I've worked with that, because everyone's so young. Like that's kind of the issue with the tech industry, is that it has this silicon bro culture of like being quite dressed down and quite casual. But the issue is that when shit hits the fan and shit needs to get done, and you need to have be professional, people don't have experience to do it. And that's how you end up with all of these massive toxic problems of like burnout culture and sexual harassment, like these huge blemishes on our industry that are so apparent. You're like, it's the culture. And part of the reason is because the oldest person in the office is maybe like 35, possibly 40 if you're lucky, and there'll be like one person. Otherwise, like everyone else is in their early to mid 20s, and this is probably the only job that they've had, or a very similar job like it. And like there's pros and cons to that, but ultimately I would go to the office every single day as a caster, and no one could really kind of figure out what the casters were doing. And there would be, people who would fall asleep at their desk, or like people who would cry in meetings, or just like super, super ridiculous things that you would never really expect. And it's like, we're supposed to be in the real world right now. And I think it's just teething problems, and it should be like super expected. So just watching not just like the production really level up, but also just the inherent culture. And I think now, of all of my years working at Riot, like dramatically shaped like how I go into meetings and how I think about problems and how I build a PowerPoint and kind of the language that I use and the way
Mhm.
that I think as a person, not just in my professional, but in my personal life. And it's really hard to separate those things. And, I'm really scared of the day, like now I'm a freelancer, that I don't work for Riot, or maybe I work for a different company. And were these lessons and these investments actually worth it? Does it mean anything on like a resume? Would I be able
Mhm.
to succeed in a different type of atmosphere? And I honestly don't know the question. I think that the growth that I've made just in not crying in a meeting and being able to give constructive feedback and properly managing time management and learning how to build like development and be autonomous and, not having to be micromanaged, that those would be skills that could translate to like a traditional office environment. But like, fuck if I know.
I understand you there. It's fascinating hearing your perspective as someone who's just been along for the ride the entire time.
There are a lot of amazing things that have come out of esports, especially like Western esports. When you compare it to things like the Korean market has been so much more evolved for so much longer. But I do think it's really important to like kind of underline the cons of esports, or kind of the teething pains of esports, especially when we talk about kind of like all the amazing growth. Like the growth is definitely happening, but I very strongly believe that esports is sitting in a bubble right now. Previously, that bubble popped because people couldn't monetize. You couldn't monetize fandom. That's what they struggled to figure out. They had all these guys going to like CS:GO tournaments, and they saw that there was a population that was really, invested in esports. But it wasn't until Twitch in 2011 that things started to pop back off, because they
Mhm.
couldn't figure out how to get those people who were going out to those lands, who were in those hotel rooms, who really wanted to see this thing and like be part of this competition. They couldn't figure out how to monetize it, and Twitch gave them that barrier of entry, like lifted it, like, oh, you can monetize this because you can get these people to watch on this site, and then you can attach ads to it, and it creates revenue, and you draw sponsorships, and they give you, like this hundreds of thousands of dollars here, and this is how it works. And I think we're reaching that next point where we've almost drained the platforms that we have with like Twitch and Mixer and Facebook and YouTube. And that's why you're starting to see this turn of the streaming wars, because influencers have capped. You can be
Mhm.
like Ninja was, and you can sit on your machine for ridiculous hours a single day and be like chained to it. And if you don't do it, you lose money, because that's the only way that with this system how to make revenue. And now we're saying, but I can sign to them, and it's becoming much more like traditional television deals. And there's going to be a big shift or a big burst. And if that's, I don't know, these esports selling their broadcasts to things like Mixer, like maybe one day League of Legends sells to Mixer, and if you want to watch the LAC, you have to watch it here, and if you want to watch professional COD, you have to watch it on Twitch. But that's kind of like the next big growing pain. And while we go through that, if it's fumbled, the first people who will pay the price will be the players, because they do have those ridiculous salaries on an industry that is built on capital and not actual revenue.
I think it's going to be incredibly interesting seeing where it goes from here. And just like you said, in the next couple of years, things could change dramatically. It's going to be incredibly interesting. I'm curious. You mentioned freelancing just a few minutes ago, and I know you've been going through a lot of change yourself. I would love to hear some about what your shift to freelancing is looking like. At least what you'd like to share.
Yeah. To be perfectly frank and honest, I didn't want to move freelance. I was kind of forced to do it. That
Hmm.
was the contract that was supplied to me by Riot. Previously, I had been a seasonal contractor for them, and I thought that I would just kind of continuously chain the seasonal contracts. But the the model for esports, especially like what you see in CS:GO, is much more freelance style. So it's also the model that's used in traditional sports. I expect that to kind of become the norm, and more casters, not just in League of Legends, but again in all esports, be moving into freelance capacities. And so it's part of that teething problem again of the industry, and how are we all functioning together? Because for the longest time, it was quite weird that Riot has its own in-house casters and kind of content creators and personalities, but didn't want to amplify their brands, even though the amplification of their brands would like directly lead to theoretically more revenue, because more people want to sign on to them. So it's a very strange dynamic. With being freelance, I'll work in kind of the same capacity that Shocks has really led for the LEC specifically, which is I will still have a long-term partnership with Riot as like kind of my primary client, if you will, where I'll be showing up for like X number of days on the broadcast. But then it allows me the opportunity to take, I guess, personal sponsorships. But now I have to figure out what I am as a product. What do I sell to these sponsors? Does anyone even want to buy it? And what that means, and kind of find other clients that aren't Riot. And I'm like, is that like, is that COD? Is that CS:GO? And it's just a really scary mountain to kind of stand at the foot of, because it's like you can't really get involved in another esport as a color caster, at least like the expertise of knowledge that I think would demand of these top end esports. Like I'll never get close to that. I'm too far down CS:GO. I will never be as good or better than any of the available talent that they already have as a color caster. So does that mean that I have to learn how to be an interviewer? Do I need to learn how to be a host? Do I need to learn how to grab brand new skill sets that are more transferable across title? Or do I need to completely move sideways out of esports into more of like traditional mainstream media?
That sounds like such a challenge and a super interesting one. I I was gonna say I'm not envious of you, but I also think that's a really cool opportunity to kind of see where your skills lead to and see what kind of potential is there as well. I will say I'm glad to hear that you'll hopefully be back on cast as well, because I think you would be incredibly missed if you weren't on cast at all for League of Legends. But I imagine it being such a difficult thing, thinking about possibly shifting to other esports or traditional media in that sort of sense. I feel like that would be such a difficult thing, but it's cool to hear that you're kind of working through that and processing through that.
Hopefully I like my plans are is that I want to do like podcasts and video series and kind of work with different orgs, like some of the LAC domestic orgs. I'll probably show up and be doing like specific content with them, similar to like what Ovally has
Mhm.
done with G2 and Team Liquid. But I think that I'm going to try to move more into public speaking, or possibly I'd really like to go into activism. So completely moving out of the esports space, but still really relying on some of the hard skills that I've learned as a public speaker and broadcaster.
That's incredibly cool. So, to round out the show, we've talked about some incredibly interesting things, learned about you, but like I tell all my guests, the real important part of this podcast is right now. This is where you get your chance, especially as a freelancer. This could be your huge break. I'm calling up Nintendo right now, and you get a chance to pitch a game to them. Or Sony or Microsoft, whichever you'd prefer. Maybe you'd like to be in the IKEA Xbox that they're putting out. Whatever it might be. This is your chance to create a game for them. So, Frosk, I would love to hear what is your dream game? What is this dream amalgamation of an experience for you? So, let's start out with a character. What would be your protagonist in this game?
See, when you pitch it that way, I would almost completely left turn. And I would say that the game that I've been trying to pitch, I've pitched it to Riot multiple times. They don't want to make my game. Is a competitive racing game. I would love to make a team racing game because I'm all about the go fast, and I would love it to be structured. There's a competitive racing game in Korea called Kart Rider. When I was in Korea for the 2014 World Championship, they have like just esports on television. It's great. And I would watch them play and I'd be like, oh my God, this is amazing. I've missed my calling. This is perfect. But I would want a team of 5, and you race another team. So there's 10 people on the track at a time, and you remove the last person's time. So you win the match or the race by the aggregated medium of the time. So like once ever, like you find the average of it and whoever had the fastest average, but you remove the time of the last person. So if someone just like gets fucked like right out the gate, like falls off the course or whatever, you can't just get screwed over by the last person. And that could open up strategies where you've got 5 guys and one of your guys actually drives the wrong way on the track and is literally like trying to find the other team and just ram them off the course. And then you have different classes. Like you could have a big tank class, which is basically like your Bowsers from Mario Kart, that if you run into them, you just go flying off of them. Maybe your support, your utility class can like pick up items and they're the only one that can do that. Or maybe they like your DPS class are like on little motorcycles and they can actually like drift off of people. So you can have different configurations. Maybe you grab like 4 different motorcycles and you literally just try to slingshot around the course as quickly as possible, drifting off of each other because that's the only vehicle that can do it. There's like so many different combinations of possibilities.
This is incredible. I love it. So you mentioned items. So would this be like road
I
rash
know that
type
that
racing?
wasn't what I sent you in the email.
No, this is amazing. I love it. So would you? Yeah, are they picking up items? Are they like stabbing each other with spears and chainsaw? Like what's going on this track?
I think that there would definitely have to be some sort of you want to try to remove some of the RNG from it, so you'd have to try to really balance the items, but I think you need to have some sort of way to interact outside of just driving into each other, so having things like power-ups and items. I think
Mhm.
there'd also have to be some sort of mechanic where you could move from car to car, so if you're driving in like different formations and
Ooh,
like how you line up, because it would be like running plays basically.
yeah.
Like think like Mad Max style, like maybe you can jump from car to car and add some sort of element there. But then it's you take like the precision of finding the right line in racing games to get like the fastest possible time, and then you combined it with like the strategy competitive element of like what's the formation that we're running, not just in the class of cars that you're taking onto the course, but in also like the execution, and then how you have to then balance how you're interacting with the enemy team or the enemy racers.
How did Riot not take your idea on this? I love it.
I feel like I'm throwing it down.
You
I
are.
told him to make an iconic skin line. I was like, this is what you need to do. You need to make a singed Dyrus skin. You need to make a Messiah Twisted Fate skin. You need to make like a Mad Life Thresh skin, and Uzi Vane skin, like Bjergsen Syndra, or what, like these really iconic players, or even like possibly you can only do retired players. Like let's say you do like a Hall of Fame skin line,
Yeah.
Faker Zed. And like that's what you run. Who doesn't want like Dyrus Singe where he literally has like his pillow and he's running around and he does the Dyrus laugh when he does it?
I love it. Okay, quick divergence. I don't know what I'm saying. Why the hell has Riot not put out a skin line
Divergent?
for
Tangent?
a tangent? Why have they not put out a skin line for casters? I think that would be amazing. Like have a specific skin for different casters.
Honestly, I have no idea. So there's no like there's no official answer here. I would imagine issues would run into it in licensing the
I can
image
imagine that.
and like who actually gets monetization there.
That would be difficult. That would be difficult. That's probably a more reasonable answer than me just complaining about no skins for casters. Anyways, back to your game. Weapons, character. Where would be like the iconic track for this game? Because clearly there's probably a few tracks, or maybe not. Where would you want it located?
I think you have to have a snow track. Every great racing game has a snow track.
Yes.
And when you add the weather elements of slip and slide, like that's when shit gets real. You have to have a rainbow road track. And it doesn't
Oh no.
necessarily have to be like real fabulous looking, but it has to be very, very dangerous. Like no walls. It's all about like precision. You can't mess it up. If you mess it up once, you're donezo straight out of the gate. And you have to have a desert map because you have to pay homage to
Yes.
Mad Max. And those are kind of like your three big cores.
I love it. I will say I'm slightly scarred from Rainbow Road. I just remember it was actually back in Germany. I studied over there for a few months, and I remember getting drinks one night and coming back to someone's apartment and playing. I forgot which Mario Kart it was, but trying to play Rainbow Road while drunk. It was the most. It was the weirdest experience I've had. But I think that's a great idea for this game. A Rainbow Road would create drama, especially if this becomes an esport. You definitely want that drama there.
We used to play a game in uni called Don't Drink and Drive, which obviously don't drink and drive. So we were playing by the rules, but you could, it was a drinking game, for drinking milk. And you couldn't drink your milk and drive at the same time. So you could either shotgun the milk straight out the gate and like as soon as you were done, then pick up the controller and try to complete, or you could pull over to the side of the road and take big chugs, but you had to finish it before you crossed the finish line. Otherwise, it was against the rules. So, like, very different strategies. And when you're, I don't know, the fourth course down and you've been trying to do this every single course, shit gets wild. Like, no one is able to stay on the road.
That's an amazing idea. So, for your game, it's obvious the genre is obviously a team racing game. The last kind of element we want to touch on is composer. Is there any like soundtrack or composer or like it can be from another game. You can be like, I want this game's soundtrack in my game. Is there something that stands out for your game?
I mean, the greatest racing game soundtrack was Need for Speed Underground 2 that had like the Offspring and stuff on it. But
Oh yes.
I think for this type of racing game, you should have Daft Punk. or that type of like funky electro style music be the background. But if it's like more realistic graphics, then I think you have to go like the Offspring and Blink 182 and like more of that Crazy Taxi, Need for Speed Underground, maybe some like old 90s hip hop mixed in.
You're like speaking to my high school right now. We used to listen to the Offspring while playing Halo 2 during those overnighter things. So man, I would love that soundtrack. But also the Daft Punk is a good way to go too, because that's like Tron mixed in with this, I guess it mixed in with this racing game. So I think this is a good idea. I'll check with Microsoft and Sony, see if they're on board. I think they will be. This might be your huge break, Frosk.
I've been waiting. I'm just full of ideas.
I love it. Well, Froskurinn, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day to hang out on my podcast. I really appreciate it. Also, thanks for staying up later there to do that. So I appreciate you coming on. Where can people find you?
People can find me over at www.froskurinn.com. And if you can't spell it, they can hang me out at Twitter at Froskurinn. And if you can't spell that, I can't help you.
I will say you will not be disappointed if you go over to her Twitter and look at her posts. I was talking with her beforehand, and literally Froskurinn has one of the few Twitter accounts that I actually like to look at and read the posts on because they're hilarious. Anyways, Indiana, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed hanging out and chatting.